But often these reactions are quite strong. I mean, I think, I think that fear or disgust or strong emotions encountering something new oftentimes cause you to linger or to, maybe not in an amusement park, but yeah, I mean, even in an amusement park, you've got a fright house in an amusement park. Yeah, so there's certainly that negative reaction that can be really compelling. I come alive in the desert. It's fun to hear emails from people are out in the field that are biologists, because they're way more chipper than they are when they're responding from their desk. Because I got an email from Steve Tonser in Spain, and he was just like effusive, the most effusive email I've ever received from him. So I think that there's also this kind of this brightening of our interior space sometimes when we encounter not only familiar but maybe non-threatening.
What makes one curious in that situation is that you're simultaneously sort of horrified or unsettled, but underneath that is this glimmer, right? And it's the sort of sorting out of that kind of thing that is the action of curiosity. And it's interesting how different. Oh, sorry. It's interesting how differently that plays out for different personalities who end up with a very structured approach to it, a scientific approach, versus what you described as a sort of a messy approach in the book that you were circulating. And those are both really important approaches to curiosity, and not so segregated between the fields as we might imagine, I don't think.
So I was thinking a little bit about, because I don't think when I'm really, really, really curious about a work of art, when it hits me, and that's the key with the encounter, right? It's the unexpectedness, the thing that causes you to linger, the element of surprise or unexpectedness. So where am I going with this? Honestly, I don't think it's troublesome or worrisome or it frightens me or it's intimidating. It's more often than not just simply wonder. And I know that wonder has come up in prior fora, and that people have talked about the difference between wonder and curiosity, and the way in which wonder might be a starting point, but curiosity leads to action, which then results in you making or producing or doing something. So I can just talk through like how I encounter a work of art or how that happens. And the one thing I want to add to the conversation is receptivity and openness. So a past speaker, I think it was the first session, was keen on linking the term curiosity to mastery, as if you could gain expertise, right? That if curiosity drives you, you devote time and attention and you scrutinize a question until you know the answer, you master the material, you gain expertise. And I have a really different way of thinking about curiosity. Another word that came up is heresy, and that word, of course, is really intriguing to me, and I think there's something to that, too, because curiosity can enable you to be bad. It can enable you to pose questions that trouble other people, right? Okay, so let me try to back up a second. So for me, I think my bifurcated activity, being an orderly and competent administrator and teacher, and then trying to not be all those things in my private creative life, I have half my family comes from Pennsylvania Dutch German ancestry, very Protestant sort of work ethic where everything was in its damn place at all times. There's no mess ever. And then the other part of my ancestry comes from English Quakers, which is literally a receptivity to let the spirit in and shake you. So I think those two aspects of where I come from sort of enable me to hover between the messy versus the ordered, right? Okay, so how does this happen? The great thing about teaching Intro to World Art is there is no set content. There just isn't, right? There isn't anything I really have to teach, right? Some colleagues would just kick and scream if they heard me say this. It's going to be online. I know. I cut out Leonardo da Vinci. So there's nothing you have to teach, and I mean anything could technically qualify, right? So at a certain point in time, tattooing practices from Polynesia replaced Flemish painting from the 15th century, right? But Flemish painting from the 15th century comes back in when I want it to come back in, when it's necessary for it to come back in, right? So things are coming and going. It's this revolving door. So the class becomes a playground for me. And I'm always looking for new things to bring into the class. I'm going to put a pitch into the Renwick Gallery. They have had an amazing exhibition. It's just simply called Wonder. Most of it is only, the whole thing is still up only until May 6th, I believe. Part of it will be up until early June, but then it closes. They emptied the entire Renwick Gallery and they gave over the spaces to, I believe, 6 or 7 installation artists who just went in and did amazing things with these gallery spaces. So I was in DC a few weeks ago and I wandered, because that's another key aspect of curiosity. You have to open yourself up to the meandering and the wandering, the slow looking, the slow moving, and I know that's been iterated at many points in this series. I came around a corner, and you're standing in front of the gallery door, which just gets to curation, too, because curators, right, my friends over there, curators are also very good at establishing moments of wonder, establishing moments of encounter. And in the door, there's an immense tree. And the tree is positioned horizontally instead of vertically. So as you, can't do this and hold the mic at the same time, as you come to the door, right, and you're standing and you look at the doorway, the tree, the trunk of the tree, you're looking into the hollow, right? You're looking all the way through the shaft of the trunk of the tree. You know, and it fills the doorway. You're not even sure how you can get into the room. Right, so you have to walk into the door. The artist's name is John Grade. I, of course, have to give him credit for this moment, right? So you walk into the door. You have to shimmy around this trunk, and then you realize the tree fills the whole room and its branches and everything. What this guy did, and this is where curiosity leads to action. You research. You want to know, what is this about? This guy, he's a Seattle-based artist. He went into the Cascade Mountains. He did a plaster cast of an entire 150-year-old cypress tree. He took the mold and the thing is made out of tiny little pieces of repurposed cedar that are about less than the size of a Lego piece. Okay, so they're about 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, these tiny little rectangles. He had a team, so the individual project became collaborative. He had a team of people who literally glued and constructed the entire tree out of that. So it was a replica, a hollow, but not hollow replica of the original thing. And then he hangs it from the ceiling horizontally instead of vertically. What does that mean? And it moves, right, on these thin fish wires, these fishing lines, as people move around it, and they're generating air currents. And the tree moves, and it's monumental and heavy and weightless and fragile all at the same time. And the most amazing thing is he's going to take this tree when it's done, he's going to put it back on the forest floor and leave it. And it's going to biodegrade, back into the ecosystem. So what am I doing? So I'm reading about this artist. I'm going to Seattle this summer. I'm going to try to get in touch with him. I'm going to try and see what more he does. And then this becomes part of the landscape unit in Shared World Art, right? So that's how it works.
So one topic that came up that I wanted to touch on a little bit is the sort of juxtaposition between curiosity and order. And so that's something that I think as scientists we're always sort of grappling with. So as scientists, we want to put everything in its place. We want to be able to explain everything in the natural world down and put it in its place. But really, if you step back and think about it, the thing that spurs our curiosity as scientists is the things that don't fit the pattern, the things that we don't have a theory to explain. And those are the things that I gravitate toward. Those are the things that if I'm out in the desert, or for me it's more likely to be the rainforest, and I'm off looking at a frog to collect data on whatever behavior it's doing at the moment, and then this beetle lands on me and it's doing something I've never seen before. My brain is going to, why is it doing that? How did it get that way? What's the motivation for this little beetle to do that thing? And so, it's, for me, it is really this sort of battle between wanting everything to fit, but then also being fascinated by the bits that don't fit into the way we understand the world and the theories we have to explain nature. And so that was just something that I thought of that you had touched on a little bit that I can sympathize with in a totally different setting.
Because the other word I want to enter is humility. The more I learn as a teacher of art, the more I realize I know nothing. And so when the word about mastery and expertise, I think the main point I'm trying to make is just the opposite, that wonder and curiosity opens you to the fact that you have a very situated perspective that is very limited and circumscribed, and that there's so many others out there who have radically different ways of thinking about things, and you can never know the world, period. Sorry.
So I guess I resonate with everything that you guys said. I guess the only thing that I wanted to add from my own personal perspective on when we encounter something new is what is the most wondrous thing for me is when there's a complete not knowing, as you say, don't know, and just being fascinated, but without any conceptualizing. It's like there isn't any distance between me and that phenomenon. So,
Yeah, well, this is a really nice segue into a question here, because there is this tension between trying to make sense of the world and being open to the world not making sense, or to things in the world not yet making sense. And then when something resolves itself, I think it does quench curiosity. When you feel like you've understood it, then that's almost an antithesis to curiosity, when you've mastered something. And so this question here is, would you say curiosity is a constant state or an exceptional event or circumstance? So can you remain in a constant state of curiosity, or is there a cycle to this, or unevenness to curiosity because of this tension?
I would love to stay curious all the time.
For me, I would love to say it's a constant state. I think practicality of life intervening, responsibility intervening, I think it's episodic. I think there's, like my trip to DC, my trip to that exhibition I knew that I was going to seek out an exceptional experience. In your Monday, like today in the car, I was just driving, and there's a wonderful news story came on about a new book called The Three Hairs. I was paying no attention. I was thinking about the traffic and the weather and the email I had to send as soon as I landed at the office. So in other words, you can purposefully intend to be curious. Most of the time you're not. Most of the time you're encumbered by the mundane. But there are flashes where curiosity forces itself into your consciousness.
A lot of times in preparing for this, I was thinking about curiosity, and I have a just turned 3-year-old daughter, and one of the things that I noticed is curiosity does seem to be the constant state of little kids. And I mean, my daughter doesn't have anything to worry about in life except for, what interests her at that moment. And, that can vary from, I don't know, what her toy is doing at the moment to why this flower bloomed before that one, which she was asking me about the other day. And I feel like that's sort of our natural state that we begin with, but more and more, life happens as you grow up, and I feel lucky that some of us get to interact with curiosity as our jobs. But I don't think that's the case for everyone. I think a lot of us would prefer for curiosity to be our constant state, but I think we grow out of it a little bit.
Over the course of this series, I've listened to people try and deconstruct curiosity out of a lot of different topics. And especially tonight, I've heard this resonance between curiosity and creativity. And it actually strikes me as people are trying to do an impossible task. That in fact creativity and curiosity, or creativity or curiosity and action, are all almost impossible to deconstruct. And I'd be curious to have the members of the panel take the contralateral approach and look at a constructionist view of where do they see curiosity as so intricately involved with creativity or other aspects of the things that, as many of us who are academics do, that you really can't deconstruct it. And so could some of the panelists want to comment on a constructionist view of this as opposed to a deconstructionist view?
No. I guess one of the things that I don't know that this will get at what you're talking about, but I think, a constant state of curiosity, or, so I see that in my daughter too, and now that she's a teenager and hormones are flowing, it's like, no, that curiosity, although she did say last night, is there just a job that I could do where all I could think about was things that I wondered about? Could I just wonder for a job? Yeah, that's what I said, and then she said, without doing philosophy. My friends are into that, but I'm not. but I think, I was reading, I was thinking about conventions and reading about innovators, the personality traits of innovators on the 5-trait model. And one of the traits of innovators that is really important is where they land in terms of agreeableness and disagreeableness. The more disagreeable they are, the more likely to be an innovator. And that has, and not that they're mean or or crotchety or anything like that, but that to someone who's willing to go against convention, or to maybe doesn't have the same kind of understanding of social norms, someone who is willing to take risks, is someone who's more likely to do something very new. And I think, and I was just kind of thinking about conventions in terms of, kind of like me going and seeing this thing, and okay, I know this and this and this, and this doesn't fit, and so how do I make sense of it now? So there's these ways of knowing, but how do we, we can do research, we can, plug in all of our devices and do all this stuff, but how do we really, come to know something? And I think, so one of the things we're talking about is also the passion that fuels all of these things that we're doing, that we're all doing. That it's not just wanting to know more. I'm not an artist because I want to be an artist. It's like I can't help doing the things that I do or thinking about the world and the way I think about it. And this is kind of just the way it works for me. And I feel very fortunate to have found that way of being in the world, I guess. So I think passion is also the root of it, which is not constructing really anything, but maybe it's honoring what's already there and trying to see things a little bit differently in the path.
So can you separate curiosity, or is this part of everything you are and do because you can't do it differently?
It depends on which chair I'm sitting in, I think. There are moments where curiosity has been killed, and it's not a cat, but it's, I think that was some questions that Carol posed to us when we were talking earlier, is like, where are the places that curiosity is shut down, or what are places that, open curiosity for you? Maybe convention in some ways is a place where curiosity shuts down. It's like, it's the known. It's like, I'm trying to touch the unknown. I don't know. So yeah, in our field, curiosity sometimes shuts down when people feel like they've gotten to the final answer, where, a theory's been tested so many times that we feel like we understand it completely. And I've seen cases where, we thought we had closed the book on how this piece of the world works, and then 40 years later, someone makes an observation that throws that out. And all it takes is one observation that doesn't fit the pattern to get everyone, get people excited and curious again. The other thing I wanted to mention, I was thinking about the question about whether you can disentangle curiosity from creativity, and I feel like in my life I can do that to some extent. I mean, I'm very curious about certain topics, and I actively pursue those in creative ways. But in other topics in science or in other aspects of my life, I'm fairly happy to just read what other people have done and just to understand, the current state of knowledge in the world and not pursue it further. So I would guess someone who's a bookworm on a certain topic is obviously being curious, but not necessarily creating, not necessarily contributing to, a new view or perspective on that topic. And in some aspects of my life, like for right now, home renovations is something I'm really interested in learning how to do that kind of stuff. But I don't want to, develop a new technique or a new product. I just want to learn how to do it right. So I'm curious to learn how to do it right, but I don't feel like I need to push that in any particular. But I haven't actually picked up any pieces of material yet, so really I'm just reading at this point. Yeah.
So I wonder to what extent curiosity is a process of model building, right? And this, in sort of constructionist terms, which is appropriate to what you were just talking about, right? But is it always that way? I mean, we think of curiosity as also having a kind of a destructive element, but is it destructive because you know that you have to sort of tear out the old plaster before you can rebuild the wall? Is curiosity fundamentally a model building way about the model of the world?
What do you mean by model?
Well, I mean that we don't really know what's out there. We construct a story for ourselves we construct a story for ourselves of what the world is about and of how we fit in that and of what kinds of things will happen in the future based on that model, which is based on past experiences and past curiosities, right? And we explore that model to see where it fits and where it doesn't. Is that really what we're doing with curiosity, is sort of attempting to make sense of the world? I mean, I also think of myself as a teenage boy, kind of interested in wrecking things some of the time and not interested in rebuilding a model. So I don't know if that, I mean, so for me, that's one thread of the action of curiosity, is this action of model building. But are there other threads? I guess is what I'm asking.
I want to put this on Carol, because you were speaking about this a little bit earlier and about the I in curiosity, and putting a model together and then trying to ask whether or not some unexplained new encounter fits a model is putting the I in curiosity. But is there a phase to this that's more open, more receptive, that doesn't involve applying models? Are these different phases? What is your experience in interacting with
Okay, so first of all, I'll just say I don't know. But, because I don't really understand this stuff about models. But as you were talking and I was, it was all reverberating here, what came up for me was this image or sense that curiosity is the wind, and the walls through which that wind moves is the model. So there's something that as humans, our past, our previous experiences kind of set up a little bit of that boundary. But it's the energy and the wind, basically. It is the curiosity. Does that make any sense?
Well, sure. I mean, this was something I was thinking about when Delanie was talking about the fence and your first encounter with the fence. And, well, what did you do? We talked about tools in a prior conversation. You took out of your bag, your mental bag, your tools. How big is it? What are my social touch points for this as a fence? What does a fence mean? But there's creativity there as well. So some of it is, I think of myself struggling as a jazz musician on the saxophone of feeling like I'm falling into patterns in the creativity that I use in improvisation, and trying to get back that curious wandering into my activity, the action of what I do, which is about throwing out models or habits or patterns and remaining open to surprising yourself even, or allowing a situation to surprise you. So how do we deal with that? Maybe this is a place where curiosity and creativity part or come together in important ways.
I mean, I think for me, the process is just much more cyclical and reciprocal, so that the wandering, the meandering, and the encounter and the surprise that takes you off path, off kilter towards the unexpected will for me, particularly in my teaching, gets reabsorbed and turned into a narrative that gets turned into a story that makes sense to me, that I feel is important to convey to my students. And then right? And it just keeps going, right? And then you get stuck in a rut, right? And something else, you encounter something else that then opens you up to a new question.
And I would offer in relation to that, and not really as a counter, but I think also as an artist, one of the things that I brought that was a formative, maybe it was a tool for me, it was Richards-Zawacki, the sculptor. In the late 60s, developed the Verb List, and it's 84 verbs and 24 conditions. It's not that he was stuck, but it was like, how do you engage with material? Got it. It's in his handwriting. MoMA owns it. But to roll, to crease, to fold, to store, to bend, to shorten, to twist, to dapple, to crumple, to shave, to tear, to cut, to spit, to sever, to drop, to remove, to simplify, and on and on. And so I think one of the things, when you're talking about these patterns, I also think, how many times have I mixed plaster? And I'll mix plaster, and maybe the condition's different. There's humidity, or the water's colder, and those conditions impact the way the material works. But through the repetition of a technique, or a way of knowing something, or exploring something, or doing an experiment over and over, there's a repetition in that. And in the repetition and doing it repeatedly, I kind of stop to think about the plaster. And I stopped to think about the reaction, and the water making it harden, and the time, and the bubbles, and all those things. I stopped to think. And then it's kind of in those moments, it's not necessarily destructive, but when I've come out of the recipe or not thinking, those moments are the places where it's like, oh, I've never used plaster like that before, or look what happened, or I dropped it. But oh my gosh, and there's this new possibility that's all about, oh, I'm going to try plaster in a totally different way. And so now, how do I repeat that or forget it? How do I shake it off? So it's like, I think in the repetition, which I think also, if you think about, Anne Hamilton talks about embodied knowledge and these things that we know through our body and through our senses. If we talk about children, they explore the world with their hands. So you've seen the babies. Everything goes in them, or they explore the world with their mouth. Everything goes in their mouth. That's how they know the world initially. So all of these things that are inherent. So when we get back to those places, whether it's through yoga or meditation or walking or the different things that we do, that's kind of like another ripe zone for something to emerge that maybe we wouldn't have gotten at another way.
So, as we're talking about possibly disentangling curiosity and creativity, I want to ask, as I try to be both a scientist and an artist, something that I've experienced is actually curiosity getting in the way of my creativity. When, as I'm thinking too much, I'm not actually solving the first problem at hand, and I'm thinking of all the other things that could go wrong, or making something more complicated. And then as an artist, as a musician, when I'm maybe composing, making things more complicated and trying this chord, then trying to switch this chord instead of just settling on something and moving forward. And I wanted to ask if that's something you guys struggle with. How would you consider curiosity to sometimes be detrimental to creativity? And that might be a way of kind of parsing out more where does curiosity end and creativity begin, because as I was thinking about the word creativity, the word create, the word making something, curiosity doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be productive. Does creativity mean we're going to be productive? So.
I can really resonate with what you just said, because I just saw what happens to me frequently, which is as I'm getting ready to write a paper, which is not the easy thing for me. Can go down that rabbit hole of really trying to discover, what did that person do now? And then better read those references. And so that what we might call curiosity has become a barrier to productivity. I'm not sure that I don't know if it doesn't fit my usual definitions of curiosity, but there is some curiosity in it. Not helpful though, yeah.
All right, well, I think we're close to the end. We've got one more, yeah.
I want to bring it back to what was last section about everything that you learned in kindergarten. Because what I see is great college experiences for kids who, are in your classes and get to experience your creativity and your curiosity. But how do we, I see a step that we need to reach the teachers of the future, because somehow or another between kindergarten and graduate school, curiosity is cut off for most kids, because you just, the teachers have to cut their curiosity down so that they can, teach how to whatever it is, the current Common Core, and such. And so I'm really kind of saying that I look at the action that's needed is, to somehow restore curiosity in the lower grades so it doesn't disappear, so you don't have to rediscover it when you're in college, or actually a senior in college, headed to graduate school, and such. Because I think there's such an untapped, those toddlers are doing a lot, and kindergarten, and it's just, but we also have this program of education and the fact that teachers, you had to stop, thinking about, you had to stop your curiosity so that you could actually go forward and do, what was required in your class, kind of thing. I just want to bring it back to kindergarten.
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
We've heard a number of comments here about curiosity potentially getting in the way of getting things done, or getting things done getting in the way of curiosity. So we all wear hats where we're expected to finish a paper, or administer a program, or get to work, or go shopping. And getting something done productively oftentimes does inhibit curiosity, or the time, it gets rid of the time for it. I think oftentimes we see that these requirements that students achieve are productive, get something done to demonstrate proficiency or mastery, gets in the way of the time necessary for the wandering curiosity that we're able to do before we go to school, right?
Is there just a little bit of time left?
Sure,
I
yeah,
have
of course.
an interesting anecdote that relates back to that. So when I was in kindergarten, there was a sort of pedagogical experiment going on. I don't know if this was only in Michigan where I grew up or not, but my kindergarten was operated under something called the workshop way, which is where you get in the morning and you do this one task, and then you move to the next station and you do the next task. And how many tasks you get to during the day sort of depends on how industrious you are. But the tasks are always done in the same order. Like I remember sorting colors, I remember, building a tower, and I remember going through these stations. And that did not work for my brain. Even though I'm very right-brained, I almost didn't pass kindergarten because I would go hide in the book nook and read books or look at the books, because I just couldn't. It was no creativity there whatsoever. There was no options to skip over option A and go to option C, and it did not work for me as a kindergartner. And I think one of the things I love about my position as the director of Pitt's field biological station is the fact that I get to interact with students who are experiencing creativity in science for the first time. They're out in the field, they're thinking of the theories, they're testing the theories, and that I think is something that's really important for education, is to get students out of the classroom into these places that inspire awe, inspire curiosity, and just see what happens. And that, I mean, I think you're right that needs to happen at all levels of the curriculum, not just at the early stages.
So I failed scissors in kindergarten. So that might have something to do with the fact that I spend so much time meticulously cutting things out just to prove everybody wrong. It's also because I'm left-handed and they insisted on giving me right-handed scissors. So, okay, so I have a metaphor that I give to my students who do research with me, which is, I'm looking at you, Amani. And I think if we can think about this in our teaching, whether it's kindergarten, 7th grade, or sophomore year of college or graduate school, I think of it as I use the metaphor of a big giant fishing net. And so when you're just starting the project or starting the class, or you take this net and you cast it as wide as you can, right? You just pull in everything, right? Everything you can do, and cast it in multiple directions. As though you're working through the project and curiosity has to turn to productivity, you have to just start tightening it. You have to start filtering some of it, the mass, out and focusing. And so it's expanding and then contracting. But then that can be cyclical, right? Once you've contracted, you can get expansive again. So if we can figure out a way to teach people such that they're conditioned to be doing both the expansive energy, the going out, the curious, the reaching, and the encountering the stuff you don't know, but then also ordering it, right? Limiting it. I mean, that's just, I think, how most of us have to function.
Do we have time for another question?
Sure, yeah. We'll do one last question, and then we'll just have last thoughts from everybody. We'll wrap up.
So I've come to 3 of the 4 of these sessions, and something that I found really interesting in all of the sessions, I've been left wondering, is curiosity a luxury?
Well, I'm torn. Okay, so I'm torn by this question because on the one hand, I want to say yes, because privileged people who have the time and the energy to devote their mind to wandering, you would assume, right, that privileged people have the capacity to devote time to curiosity. On the other hand, I don't want to assume, right, that people are, that in other words, that curiosity is a privilege and then only certain people have it. And because of that accidental thing, right, I just think human beings are curious, and that they might stumble upon curiosity in different ways, but I don't want to assume either. So I'm really torn by that question. I've thought about that question, and I have trouble coming up with an answer for it.
So I'm not sure I have any basis for this, but I think that it is not a luxury. It's part of who we are. It's a birthright. It's part of being human. And all too often, there are barriers. There is so much that shuts us down from that innate curiosity. And that.
I mean, I would appeal to our experience with children. I think that children are curious no matter how many other luxuries they have in their lives, or don't have.
I think if anything, it's the ability to act on that curiosity and pursue it is probably more a luxury than anything else. At least the way I think about it.
And where my mind went to try to understand that question was to think about our transition as a species from being hunter-gatherers to being agricultural, which allowed us to have larger population sizes. It allowed us to have different classes of individuals, including artisans that were professionally creative, producing creative pieces. But there's creative work that, as you would know, that predates this. Hunter-gatherers have a rich, although perhaps not very well preserved, heritage of being creative. And so that suggests to me that even before we had the luxuries afforded to us by agriculture, which certainly allowed us more leisure time and allowed us to have individuals that specialized in creative activity, that we were still curious and creative as a species. But I would imagine that you know this way better than I do.
Cave paintings and female figurines that are 35,000 years old. Yeah.
Well, let's just, any last thoughts? There's no pressure to add anything in, but anything that any of you wanted to say before we wrap up that you didn't feel like you had the chance to mention? I know that's putting you on the spot. You are the last second. No pressure.
Well, I just want to say thanks for inviting me. And I had a lot of moments of very much curiosity just even before we all gathered to just meet all of you. I'm like, I want to go see where you work.
Well, maybe that's what we should do. So just a reminder to everyone, we have been posting the videos for this, which again would like to thank Ambulantic's video work, who've been doing a fine job of, in the back there behind the camera, so you never get to see them. Been doing a fantastic job of filming this, and those are up on YouTube. So there are also blog posts by undergraduates who've been in the audience helping us with audience participation, but also writing about their thoughts and impressions from these conversations. And stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have more of these to offer and more curious places. So, yeah.